So they still needed somebody else, so who did they turn to? In the 1930s, it was Mexican Americans, and they became the next labor force and the next group of people to go after. And I'm very honored to have a very special guest with us. He comes all the way from Cal State, Los Angeles. His name is Dr. Francisco Balderrama, and he wrote a book about the repatriation in the 1930s. And we're really, really fortunate to have him come all the way up here to visit us and give a talk. So.
Such a memorable event here.
Okay, just a moment, Michael. I'm going to put this down. Being a Latino, I like to use my hands a lot. A little bit in the way. It's an honor and a particular pleasure to be among you tonight and to speak with you. I thank Tom. In the past, I've come up to the college and I've done presentations, but this has a particular relevance for me because the Japanese American community, the Japanese American generation that addressed in a very forceful manner what occurred to them and their families in the 1940s in seeking an apology and reparations has been an inspiration for my own historical work and for my own activism, and has served as a plan of how to get recognition for the massive exclusion, expulsion of Mexican nationals and American citizens of Mexican descent, not to a camp, not to a concentration camp, but rather to be expelled from this country. Over 70% of that, over 1 million individuals, were American citizens, largely children, and their citizenship was not recognized. As a result of your example, your inspiration, we were able to have the state of California issue an apology. In 2006, and it took us another 6 years, not using a single cent of state funds, to have that apology memorialized in Los Angeles in front of the LA Plaza Museum. So we'd like to go to our video that we have that captures the day that that memorial was finished.
La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, where many gathered for the uprooting of U.S. citizens' lives. During the Great Depression, many Mexican Americans were forced to leave their homes and deported to Mexico. Here is to recognize those who suffered and were split from their families. There are multiple speakers such as Senator Joe Dunn, who brought upon the Apology Act, which is to acknowledge the injustice of American government.
That it's a history that has been forgotten or swept under the rug, and yet a very significant history, because this is when the federal government came in and just picked up people all over, LA County, the city, all of them were a part of it, including the state, and just sent them back to Mexico, most of them American citizens.
This commemorative monument was created among the provisions of SB 670, which is the Apology Act for the 1930s Mexican Repatriation Program. It is a tribute to the forced removal of an estimated 400,000 Mexican Americans who legally resided in California between 1929 through 1944.
I feel very happy. I'm only sad that some of my interviewees have died. I'm sad that my father's not here, who really was an advocate to try to get the bill passed, but I'm very happy.
So in 2003, we put together a panel, hearings in Sacramento, and which explored the issue, which resulted in legislation and that Apology Act that you see right there. And moreover, because of the publicity, because of the Apology Act, so many other people came forward to share their experiences, what this meant to them.
It was my mom, and she's deceased now, but she was born in Riverside, Casablanca. And at the time of the Depression, all her brothers and sisters were deported in that year. I feel honored and privileged to have the honor to be invited, and it feels good. It feels really good with my family, especially with my brothers also were here, and my sister-in-law, and everybody's here, my son, everybody's here.
La familia tiene que estar unida. La familia nunca se tiene que, y tiene uno que seguir conservando sus raíces que nos inculcaron nuestros padres. Eso que siento mucho todo lo que está pasando aquí en Estados Unidos.
It's just an absolutely great day, and the turnout today on a Sunday morning was far beyond what I would have expected, and to finally see the monument being installed, long overdue, we all know that, but it's just a great day and a reminder to us all in this environment, particularly with the political rhetoric today, that let's not repeat the past.
With an abundance of heartfelt speakers, there is an assurance that the past will be remembered. Reporting for the Daily Titan in the heart of LA, I'm Ashley Correa.
Okay, oh wait. Yeah. Hang on. Hang on? Yep. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, this is myself and my co-author, and I was thinking about the title of this session that we have here. I never saw my father again. Ramon and I met in the archives of Mexico City. We did not know each other before that, even though we both live in Southern California. We were both historians. And I met him in the archive, and he was on a grant, I was on a grant. We were working there. This is before we did this book together. And we kind of went our separate ways. We had worked on the early 20th century, and we became great friends. We would share our research with each other. And speed ahead, after doing research on Decade of Betrayal, having it all ready to go out first in 1995, having everything done, just finished everything, last copy editing, all ready to go. He tells me, a man that I knew at that time for some 20 years, tells me, you know, my father was a repatriate. I never saw my father again. Just amazing. I had known the man well, broke countless meals with him. He wasn't just a colleague, a worker, but he was a very close friend of mine. And it kept that locked away, so to speak. So this book was a way for him to explore that past and bring about knowledge and understanding about what that great tragedy was about. It's been a long day. Please be patient. Okay, here we go. Anti-Mexican hysteria. Many of you know very well what happened to the Japanese and Japanese Americans during World War II. It's the same thing happening during the 1930s. The comments that Tom was making, you know, obviously very valid here as well. An anti-Mexican hysteria, particularly because the common thinking of the time, a Mexican is a Mexican. We don't distinguish in terms of how long they've been residents or not. We don't make any distinction about that. And we don't make any distinction whether they're citizens or not. Also, what was a key factor as well is the notion or the idea that you can't really Americanize them. They cannot really become part of the society. So at this particular moment, you have America for Americans, veterans of foreign wars as well, creating this element, this idea that if you could get rid of these people, there would be enough jobs for everybody. Jobs for real Americans. Sounds familiar?
Yeah.
Okay, expulsion by train. That was the main vehicle. What I'm showing you they're on the web, but actually we have very few pictures. This was an historical period that not everybody had a camera. I have to tell this to my students a lot. Okay, now everybody walks around with a camera, with their phone. But this was a period that didn't have very many pictures. Also keep this in mind. The American government wasn't highlighting this. Also, the Mexican government wasn't highlighting it as well. The Mexican government did accept these people because they were Mexican citizens. And many of the children technically were Mexican citizens as well by blood. So they accepted them, but not wanting to publicize it, especially because Mexico, as well as the United States, was going through the Great Depression. Now, only about 20% of the population was expelled by the federal government. The Border Patrol or the Immigration and Naturalization Service, or what we now call ICE today. Those are the entities in our government that has responsibility for controlling the borders. More importantly, at this historical moment, which makes it different than today, and we all know things are happening. In Southern California, 166 persons were rounded up in the last couple of days. They're trying to do it like it's just normal, but it's what we see coming, and we'll find out more Tuesday, is probably much more intensive. The private sector was very active. U.S. Steel, Ford Motor Company, Southern Pacific Railroad, told their Mexican workers, you would be better off in Mexico with your own people. With your own people, where you can have your own food and you can speak your own language. Well, you can do that in San Jose, can't you? You can do that in San Antonio, you can do that in LA, right? That's the way they were selling it. And much more importantly is that on the local level, the county level, is where you have government entities there telling their Mexican residents the same story and recruiting them for those trains, providing them tickets initially to the border, later on into the interior. And LA County, which served as a model for throughout the United States, because this is a national movement, LA County at the very end, just before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, had a plan of even sending checks. Don't believe that? Imagine the publicity on that. Sending accommodation checks, adjustment checks, they were going to call it, to people in Mexico because they were beginning to come back. They wanted to keep them there. Interestingly, the counties involved in the responsibilities of the federal government. Sounds familiar? The state's doing this, the local agencies. That's what Arizona was thinking about a couple of years ago. Alabama a couple of years ago. Okay, family affair, U.S. citizens deported. Key aspect here, once again, we don't have very many photos. This is of a caravan coming through Texas. You see the children right there? They all are U.S. citizens. The vast majority of them are U.S. citizens. And frequently it was thought and presented to the public, oh, let's keep the families together. So that means we deport them together. And like being family. But you've heard it, right? Okay, Donald Trump, okay. We're going to keep the families together. Okay, I don't have copies of my book to sell you, okay? This is the 1995 edition. Interestingly, I did this in 1995.